Rev up your power unit and hold on to your chopsticks because in this episode of F1 Brake Check, we are taking you on a whirlwind preview of the Chinese Grand Prix. This week marks the return of Formula One to China and the Shanghai International Circuit, and we're here to help you get ready. In this episode, we'll discuss some of the latest news and rumors, and we will give our predictions on how the weekend will shake out. We will have part two of our discussion about the power plants that make F1 cars go in our tech corner, and Corey will make my brain into chop suey in our Stump the Pundit section. Settle in, buckle up, and grab a fortune cookie and get ready for a taste of what's to come on F1 Brake Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
All right, we're back with F1 Brake Check. My name is Scott Vick. I am one of your hosts. With me, as always, is my partner in crime, my brother in arms, my pundit for life, Corey Broom. Corey, how are you doing, sir?
Good, really good. Just waiting for this weekend to actually see our F1 race. It's been like withdrawals not having it last weekend.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about you? How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, sir. Thank you for asking. We had a really nice time at our in-person meetup that we do from time to time. I got to enjoy some really good food, smoke some really nice cigars, and got to discuss all things Formula One and life in general. First things first, we have to talk about Lawrence Stroll backed the money truck up. But it wasn't to Adrian Newey's house this time. It was to Fernando Alonso's villa. So Alonso took and signed a long-term deal that will keep him with Aston Martin for the remainder of his driving career. During that time, if at any time he decides to hang up the helmet, he will be staying on with Aston Martin in an advisory role, which I think just goes to show just how much of a commitment that Alonso has towards Aston Martin.
On to Andretti and Alpine.
Another rumor that surfaced this last week, we have to talk about Andretti Global has pushed forward with their intentions to enter Formula One as a constructor by opening up a brand new facility to support the Formula One team at Silverstone. It's already a really, really nice facility, and I think it really takes and shows Andretti's commitment to being on the grid in Formula One.
He's definitely wanting to get there. Now, the question is it going to be his own constructor or is he going to overtake Alpine?
Yes, which that was one of the rumors that came out this week, is the fact that because of Alpine's poor performance so far this season, that the parent company Renault has kind of lost their taste for running in F1, and that the possibility of a sale to Andretti might be imminent. But then the team boss at Alpine came out and categorically denied the sale rumors and tried to squash those. But my thinking is that a lot of times when we see the team bosses and people with inside knowledge, the more vehement they deny it, usually that's the more truth that there might be to the rumor.
In most other sports, you would have rumors, and typically they're not true. In F1, there's at least a sliver of truth somewhere in that. It's not somebody just throwing something out there. There's something there. And just like you said, if you go through and the CEO is being that adamant about we're not being sold, I wouldn't doubt it. If I was Renault at this point, seeing how bad Alpine has been performing, it doesn't take long for a company to see how much money they're spending in, say, F1 in this case, and be able to say, hey, look, you can't even crack the top 15, much less get in a scoring range. This is too much money for us.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. All right, so the next thing we got to talk about is Max's possible moves. Turns out this week that Max Verstappen is possibly looking at making a move away from Red Bull because of all of the turmoil that has been happening, first with the allegations against Christian Horner and Helmut Marko, the possibility of Adrian Newey leaving for Ferrari or Aston Martin, for a team that for the last decade or so has been rock solid, united front, no cracks at all in the armor. To suddenly have all these issues makes you kind of wonder what else is going on that we're not privy to, that hasn't been seen in the press. So it was revealed this week that Max's lawyer actually had a brief conversation with people inside of Ferrari. We don't know who, but we do know that he did have some exploratory talks with folks at Ferrari. And we also know that Max actually sat down with people inside of Mercedes to see about their possible strategy and their direction going forward. Even though he's locked up presumably through 2028 at Red Bull, are we seeing a possibility that Max may exercise one of his exit clauses in his contract and might be looking to make a jump somewhere else? Your thoughts, Corey?
We talked about it a few podcasts ago, but the only people that are going to defeat Red Bull at this point is Red Bull. And we're starting to see little pieces here and there of people being upset with it. So, whether Horner did or did not do this, the problem is the damage is done, especially the way that everything transpired. It leaves people in a really bad feeling that this isn't really the place or organization that represents me as a person. So people that have alternatives like Max, like Newey, they can find other places that is, at least to them, a healthier place to be employed. With Max, especially going to Mercedes. Mercedes is a weird one, though. I'd like to point out that Lewis left for a reason. I would be curious if Max would really want to step into Mercedes, knowing that they do have some very serious performance problems with that car. Even going into 25, 26, those problems aren't going to go away. You still have the engineers and everything like that.
The last one that we'll talk about today that I thought was kind of an interesting and kind of funny thing is the fact that Bernie Ecclestone is still making money from F1. So for our newer listeners who might be newer to Formula One, just a little bit of background. Bernie Ecclestone, once upon a time, was the leader supreme for Formula One. He was basically everything as far as the Formula One rights contracts, TV contracts, everything ran through Bernie Ecclestone until he sold his majority stake to Liberty Media a couple years ago. And so Bernie Ecclestone has had some legal troubles, and he's kind of kept his distance from Formula One since selling his shares and walking away from the sport. But somehow he still manages to make money from F1. And did you see this, Corey?
I did not see it. No, I found it very amusing when I saw it in your notes.
Yes. Okay. So it turns out that Christian Horner made a bet with Sergio Perez that he couldn't put it on the front row. I guess probably trying to give him some motivation and everything. So Perez took the bet and said, yes, I can put it on the front row. And then he also made a bet for the same amount of money to Bernie Ecclestone, saying that he wouldn't be on the front row. And so as it ended up, because Sergio Perez qualified second for the Japanese Grand Prix, he won the money from an undisclosed amount from Christian Horner, and then immediately had to take and turn around and pay the exact same amount to Bernie Ecclestone. So Bernie is still making money off of F1. Your thoughts?
I find it amusing that man will find a way to make money, legally or not.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And he's gotten very good at being able to hide it, because we remember we talked about his tax evasion. All right, then. Well, that was our news and rumor section. So let's move on to our tech corner. This is part 2 of our 3-part series. Last week, we talked about the notable engine regulation changes and the revolutionary ideas and technologies that use these rules to propel F1 cars in the early years. We talked about the eventual rise of the turbo era and ended the discussion on the turbo era's eventual demise. After the 1988 season, turbocharging of engines was banned and a new set of regulations was enacted. The new rules set the maximum displacement of the engines at 3.5 liters, and for the first time ever, a limitation on the architecture of the engines. The new provisions limited the engines to a maximum of 12 cylinders, and the manufacturers carried on by creating powerful 8, 10, and 12-cylinder engines. During this period, some of the most famous engine manufacturers threw themselves into the pressure cooker of competition. The likes of Honda, Renault, Yamaha, Ford, Ferrari, Peugeot, Porsche, Lamborghini, BMW, Toyota, Mercedes, privateers like Zaxbyt, Hart and Judd, and Life, and many more powered the field at various times for the next decade. As the engines evolved over the next decade, innovation was the name of the game. The engineers learned that by shortening the stroke of the piston, the engines could rotate at ridiculous speeds, increasing torque and acceleration. During this time, some of the engines would scream as high as 18,000 RPMs. As the engine speeds increased, the traditional valve springs couldn't keep up and thus led to the invention of the pneumatic valve. Mechanical valves use a camshaft that rotates and, using a lobe set in specific timing, pushes down on a valve in the specific order they need to open and close in conjunction with the stroke of the piston. The mechanical spring is then used to close the valve as the cam lobe releases. With the increased revs, though, this led to a condition known as valve bounce, where the forces acting on the valve during the closing motion kept the valve from properly seating and then bouncing back and leaving the valve partly open, robbing the engine of power. Pneumatic valves, like the name implies, uses air pressure to open and close the valves. The use of high-pressure air system allows for a much smoother and consistent opening and closing of the valves at high revs, and is not subject to the fatigue or diminished damping that affect mechanical springs when stressed over long periods of time or at very high speeds. An additional benefit of the pneumatic valve is the weight saving it provides, because a pneumatic valve housing weighs significantly less than the traditional forged metal springs. During this time was also when the manufacturers began using carbon fiber parts for things like valve covers and other components to help reduce the weight of the engines. After the tragic weekend in Imola in 1994, it was felt that the cars were becoming a little too dangerous and a little too fast, and for 1995, the engine displacement was reduced to 3 liters, normally aspirated engines, but the layout was still open with the 12-cylinder maximum in place. These rules stayed in place until the year 2000, when the 3-liter V10 became mandatory. This rule change caught out Toyota, who had just designed and introduced a V12. In 2006, the engine capacity and cylinder count was further reduced to 2.4-liter V8s. These engines were by all accounts identical to the V10s, with the last 2 cylinders removed, but revved as high as 20,000 RPMs. During this time saw the rise of the use of a slew of exotic and highly toxic and carcinogenic materials being used by the engine manufacturers. These would later be banned, and new restrictions were placed on the alloys allowed in the manufacture of the engines. The next big change came in 2009, when manufacturers introduced a raft of hybrid power systems that augmented the engines. Items like KERS, K-E-R-S, were introduced that captured energy during the braking phase to wind up a motor that then provided extra power on acceleration. In 2014, the next sweeping change to the rules were introduced and saw the death of the term engine to refer to the F1 powertrain, and the new usage of the power unit term to refer to the propulsion unit of an F1 car. The new changes saw the cars become tremendously more reliable and at the same time much more efficient. With 2026 quickly approaching, we will be introduced to a whole new set of regulations for the power units that will see the current 4 power unit suppliers, Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, a thinly disguised Honda, and Renault, joined by the mighty Audi, and we'll see the return of Ford to F1 competition. Next week, in part 3 of our series, we will break down the current power units and how they supply all that power, and we'll look ahead to the rule changes to come in 2026. So join us next week to learn all about the mind-bending technology utilized by F1 in their power units. So Corey, your thoughts about any of these changes?
I wish I was a fan earlier. I've seen video, obviously, of the older, the V12s, the V8s, and man, the sound of those engines are just, is beauty. It's really interesting just to see the progression of where they started to go, and really just how ingenious it is to reuse the braking power into helping charge the power units. Just the science behind it is just amazing to me.
So let's move on to Stump the Pundit. Corey is going to come up with 1 or more trivia questions and test my knowledge of Formula One. So Corey, what do you have for me this week?
During our in real life meeting, we were talking about technical directors, and we were talking through a couple different ones. So I thought, we went through a few series of get to know your driver. So I thought, why not get to know your technical director? So the next few will be over our current technical directors. I'm not going in the past. The very first one, He was the youngest and still is the youngest technical director of any Formula One team at the age of 33. He began his career in Jordan GP in 1998, and he was promoted to a race engineer for Sato. He's been with Force India, Alfa Romeo, McLaren, Sauber, and Toro Rosso.
Okay, you didn't mention Mercedes because I was thinking it was Allison at Williams was the youngest, but I guess I am wrong.
He's tied. You bring up a great point. He is tied. So they both got it at 33. You're right.
Okay. So it's not Allison. So it would have to be the gentleman who took over at Haas, I believe, who took over for Steiner.
No, not him.
No. Okay, go ahead.
James Key.
Oh, interesting. I mean, he's been around the sport for so long.
All right, on to our next one. He started at Benetton, so you can tell that this is a little bit older. Started working on suspension systems. Actually, he started with motorcycle suspension systems and then transitioned over to cars. This may give it away for you, but he was Martin Brundle's race engineer. He's worked at Benetton, obviously, McLaren, Ferrari, Manor Racing, Renault/Alpine, and Williams.
Now, I give up. Tell me.
Pat Fry.
Yeah, I should have known that. Like you said, Pat's been around forever.
So forward on to preview for China.
Okay, so this weekend we have the Chinese Grand Prix. So this is going to be a very interesting weekend because, first of all, this is Formula One's first return to China since before the COVID global pandemic. So it's been 5 years since the circus has raced at the Shanghai International Circuit in China. To add additional intrigue to this weekend, it is the first sprint weekend of 2024. Over half of the grid has either never raced at Shanghai. So you've got Logan Sargent, Piastri have never raced at Shanghai. And then you've got other notables such as Lando and Russell and a number of other drivers who have only driven the circuit one time because they drove it the last year that they ran it 5 years ago. So you've got over half the field has either never raced it on this circuit or only raced on it once. Wow. The teams have not had any testing at Shanghai in the 5 years since the last race. The vast majority of the data that they had from 5 years ago is going to be absolutely useless because that was pre-ground effect coming into the rules book. And because of it being a sprint weekend, they're literally going to have one practice before they have to go out and qualify for the sprint race. So it's going to be very interesting. And I think we're going to have a very jumbled up grid compared to what we're normally seeing. First of all, your thoughts on the return to Shanghai before we jump into our normal 4 questions.
I think it's going to be very good for somewhat of a leveling of the field. Nobody's going to have an unfair advantage over the other, except for maybe Lewis. But, he has not the best car, so maybe that's the equaling factor there. But
no, I absolutely think that it's going to be, like you said, it's going to be a good leveling of the field just simply because the teams, it's going to really come down to which teams are able to run their programs during the first practice to gather the most data and who is able to qualify well for the sprint race, which will hopefully translate into good qualifying efforts for the race on Sunday when they do the Grand Prix qualifying on Saturday. Going to be a lot of intrigue for this weekend for sure. Corey, I'm going to ask you the same 4 questions that we asked during all of our preview episodes. So who do you think will go well? Who do you think will not? Who's going to be your surprise? And tell me your podium.
Who will go well? I think Ferrari will go well. I think obviously Red Bull will go well. I think McLaren's going to do really well this race as well. I think that who will not do well? Alpine, Sauber, Williams. I don't see Williams really breaking the top 10. Who will surprise? I'm going to go out and say it. Haas. Haas is going to surprise us this weekend. I think that either one or both will be in points. Hopefully K-Mag will be there as well. My podium will be definitely Ferrari is going to be there as well as Red Bull. So I'd say, again, Max is going to take it. And then we'll have Leclerc and Checo. I know, groundbreaking, surprise, shock. What about you?
Okay. First, I'm going to agree with you that Ferrari and Red Bull, just simply because of the resources that are available to them, I think are going to go very well this weekend. I think that they're going to be very fast right off the truck, or in this particular case, being a flyaway race, it's going to be right off the container. I'm going to agree with you that McLaren should go very well. The Shanghai circuit is a very high-speed circuit. It should really suit the McLaren car. I'm like you. I do not think that Alpine or Sauber will go very well. I have a sneaking suspicion that Sauber will qualify very well. They might actually have a semi-decent showing during the sprint race, but I have a sneaking suspicion that they will slide backwards very quickly once the full Grand Prix starts on Sunday. Now, unlike you, I do think that because the Williams is also a car that is very, very fast in a straight line, it goes really, really well. I think the Shanghai circuit is a track that is going to suit the Williams very well, providing they don't stuff it into the wall again. If both drivers are able to keep it from crashing out, I do think that the Williams will have a very good showing this weekend. And I think that they will be a real surprise this weekend. Yeah. And I do think that also, you're right, that Haas will also have another strong showing, especially with the gains that they've made since the opening races of the season. So my podium, I went out on a limb last time and I got it mostly wrong. I had two of the drivers right, just in the wrong order. When I said Verstappen would come in second, he won the race. And I said Leclerc would win, and he ended up coming in third. I'm going to do it again, where I'm going to go out on a limb and say that we're going to have a real shakeup at the top. So for the podium, I think we're going to see Leclerc as the winner this weekend. We're going to see Max in second. And because of his vast experience, and because the Aston is supposed to have some very good upgrades this weekend coming online for China, I'm going to say Alonso will return to the podium with third place this week. All right, then. So shall we bring it home?
We're ready.
All right. We have reached the end of time, and it's time to throw the checkered flag. Join us next week when we will break down all of the results from the Chinese Grand Prix. We'll take a look at the latest news and rumors. We'll once again play Stump the Pundit, and we'll have part 3 of our Tech Corner discussing the evolution of Formula One power units. So until next time, he's Corey, I'm Scott. We are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.